Halina was also an undergrad with us a couple of years ago, and then I believe you're at Black and Decker, correct, Halina?
Yep.
Yep. And then so she is also at Black and Decker, and now just a regular full-time master's student or part-time master's student while she works. So take a deep breath, and we'll let Halina go take it away.
All right, you guys can all hear me, right?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. All right, so the title of my capstone was using coefficient of variation analysis to improve inventory forecasting at, I just put the company because we were told to exclude the name, but like Professor Scala said, it's at Stanley Black & Decker, and my advisor was Dr. Hahn. Next slide. And we can skip the table of contents. All right, so just an introduction to my project. Supply chains, as we all know, rely on forecasts to achieve the 7 rights of logistics. And more importantly, my project is focusing on having the right product in the right quantity at the right place at the right time. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm a senior demand planner at Stanley Black & Decker, working on our Home Depot account. So as a demand planner, my responsibility is to pretty much predict the sales of our customers for a rolling 24-month period. So that's what the motivation for this project was, and improving the forecast accuracy of not only my SKUs and products, but the overall companies, and driving better information to the rest of the supply chain at the company. Next slide. So poor forecast can have pretty impactful outcomes on the rest of the supply chain. Some of those being inaccurate production schedules, stockouts, late orders. So me driving the wrong forecast or any of the demand planners driving the wrong forecast can really impact everything from our manufacturing and production planning to submitting FARs to get new production lines built and scheduled, as well all the way to the end user if we don't have the right product in our stores at the right time for when you want to go and buy it. So this was just kind of a quick summary of what those impacts can look like. So next slide. All right, so my problem statement was, how does volatility of demand history impact forecast accuracy and forecastability? So again, as a demand planner, I receive at the end of every month a historical snapshot of what the demand was for the prior month, and use that to then recalculate my future models for the rest of the forecast for each SKU. And I wanted to know, how does the volatility and the variation in that demand history impact my ability to generate an accurate forecast going forward? So the objectives were to categorize the SKUs based on demand volatility and then their forecastability, create a click view dashboard, which is similar to Tableau, to collect and graphically represent the data and determine category specific strategies for forecasting. So after I'm able to categorize those SKUs, come up with different strategies for each one. Obviously, depending on the behavior of the SKU, changes the behavior that I have to have towards that SKU to generate a more accurate forecast. And then off to the right is just the calculation for coefficient of variation. Next slide. All right, so my literature review and background, I found that the coefficient of variation can be used to determine the predictability of a demand pattern or how easily it can be forecasted. So the higher the coefficient of variation, the harder it is going to be to forecast, basically meaning the more volatility and the more variation in the volume that I'm seeing in the demand, the harder it is to predict that. So just as an example, if I have a SKU that generally we see 300 pieces a month and all of a sudden we have 50,000 pieces and then 10,000 the next month, it's inherently harder for me to have predicted that. So many companies have adopted COV as a way to implement SKU segmentation, similar to what I'm doing for this project. And then just a couple caveats: seasonal data will have a high COV, but may still be very forecastable. So for example, at my company, we have outdoor products like lawnmowers, string trimmers. So they're going to show a lot of variation because we sell way more in the spring than we do in the winter. But it doesn't mean that they're hard to forecast. Obviously, we know we're going to sell more lawnmowers in the springtime, and it's a little bit easier to predict than the COV would lead on. And then just another note that's important to call out is that the COV ignores the sequence of observations. So it doesn't know if I ordered 500 last month and then 1,000, or 1,000 and then 500. It's just measuring the overall volatility of that demand. Next slide. All right, so one chart that you can look at to kind of show forecast accuracy versus the variation or the volatility is a comet chart. So that shows the forecast value added line, and anything above the line in this graph is showing that my forecast, or the forecast in this example, was more accurate than a moving average would have been. And anything below the line, we're saying that the organization's process made the forecast worse, and we would have been better off using a more naive forecast similar to a moving average. Next slide. And then it's important to note too that demand timing variability also has an impact on forecastability. So again, the 4 rights that I'm focusing on are having the right product in the right quantity at the right place and at the right time. So just kind of using that outdoor product line as an example again, we would see something like a lawnmower or a string trimmer more looking like the intermittent in the top left, as opposed to a SKU that's ordered every single day would be more of a smooth SKU. The more consistent the volume and the more consistent the timing of the demand, the easier it's going to be to forecast. Next slide. All right, so the data I collected was all North America SKUs at Black & Decker for all customers. So every channel that we sell in, and for every SKU that we sell in North America. And I gathered all the data going back to the beginning of 2018, and I cut it off at the January of 2020 when I started the project. So I collected the historical demand and the historical forecast. I did this at a lag 3, which basically means it's the forecast from 2 months prior to the month starting, if that makes sense. So like an April forecast would have been what I was forecasting in April and the beginning of February. I collected the forecast accuracy for those time periods, the demand in dollars, and the historical fill rate, meaning how much did we actually ship to our customers. Next slide. So I used the historical demand to calculate the COV for every SKU by customer. So I did separate if we had a, sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? If we had better COV or lower COV for one customer than the other, meaning it would be easier to then forecast for that customer. I used the historical demand dollars to be able to categorize by ABC, and also pulled in XYZ, which is the frequency of the demand, kind of going back to that variation in the demand timing, and the coefficient of correlation between the forecast and the demand to see if we were at least trending in the right direction. Next slide. All right, so the top left was kind of the beginning of what I was predicting that I was going to do during the course of this project. So similar to the comet chart, I have the coefficient of variation on the bottom and my forecast accuracy on the left. So I was able to split it into 4 quadrants of what I was predicting we would kind of categorize the SKUs as. So the top left being low variation and high forecast accuracy, kind of being the sweet spot. That's meaning that the variation is low enough that it should be easy to forecast, and we're currently forecasting it pretty well. The bottom left is saying that the variation is low enough that we should be able to generate a good forecast, but currently we are below our forecast accuracy goals. The top right was that seasonal caveat where it's going to have high coefficient of variation, but we're also forecasting it well, so we're able to predict that seasonality of the SKU. And then high variation, low forecast accuracy is what we're calling unforecastable, basically saying that the variation is so high that we're not able to generate a forecast, and our historical forecast accuracy is in agreement with that, showing that we haven't been able to do it. And then the bottom right graph was kind of my first prototype, if you want to call it that, in Excel, where I just took the products that I personally plan, did categorize them in ABC, which is based on the colors of the dots, and kind of overlapped it to that top left graph to show where my SKUs were laying at the time that I started this. Next slide. So this is a screenshot of the ClickView dashboard that I was able to work with the IT department at my company to develop. I did block out most of the SKU and any actual data in here, but you're able to kind of get a feel for the data that we were able to pull in. So that first graph on the left is basically a replication of the one I just showed on the previous slide, where it's by ABC. So the green dots are the bigger dollars, and they're also bigger in size in the graph. So the the bigger the dot, the bigger the dollars for the time period selected. And it does put it in those same 4 buckets that I was discussing. The chart on the right was new and we didn't really plan for it originally, but as the project progressed, it was decided to add it on. So that's showing the dots, essentially every dot is a skew, but essentially showing it in the same position as the left one, but the color coding is based on the fill rate. So if you see a skew in the top left, which means it's in the sweet spot. So again, low variation, high forecast accuracy, but on the right graph, it's in red. It means we were filling less than 90% of what our customer ordered. And that was really kind of what was allowing us to now work with our supply counterparts to drive home the full conversation. So I can say, my forecast is great. It's above our forecast accuracy goals. The variation is low. I'm able to predict it, but we're still not even filling 90% of what the customer orders. What can we do better? And then the bottom right, which is unforecastable, I'm then able to have conversations with my supply counterparts again, saying the variation is so high on the skew. My forecast isn't going to get much better. We can't be relying solely on my forecast to drive production and drive the manufacturing schedules. What can we do better to increase our safety stocks or reduce our lead time so that we can still support our customers? So those are the 2 graphs. There's a bunch of slicers on the left side that you can, pick specific category lines, business units, customers that you want to focus on. You can pick the timing that you want to look at. Right now, it's 2019 is selected in this view. And then the table at the bottom has all of the data. So again, I covered the materials, but you can see for each line, there's the coefficient of variation for that skew for the time period selected, the forecast accuracy, the bias of the forecast, the fill rate, which is again how much we're filling for our customers, just the name of which one of the 4 blocks it's falling into, and then the total demand in units and dollars in that ABC calculation. Next slide. So results and recommendations, looking at our biggest 3 customers for full year of 2019, which is the top left graph, the average coefficient of variation was 3.68, which is super high. And the forecast accuracy for that time period was 17% with a bias of 1%. And we were filling at 90%, which is below what our goals are. Usually our goal is at least 95, if not 98% for every customer. So speeding it up to year to date 2020. So we implemented this dashboard, I want to say at the beginning of February. So we have about 2 months, 2 or 3 months of using this to kind of get a basis. But year to date 2020 for those same 3 customers, the coefficient of variation did decrease to 3.4. So we have less variation in the demand in 2020 so far than we did in all of 2019. And our GFA or forecast accuracy has increased to 20% with bias and fill rate staying at the same baseline. Next slide. So all of the demand planners in our organization have been fully trained on the dashboard. So how to use it, how to interpret the data, how to understand what they're looking at in order to drive those conversations with our other counterparts within supply chain. And so far, we have seen a 3% increase in forecast accuracy since rolling this out. So some of the next steps within the company are to train the supply planning organization, which will further allow us to have those collective and collaborative conversations with them to improve our service to our customers. So again, on the last slide, our forecast accuracy got better by 3%, but we didn't fill or service our customers any better than we did when our forecast accuracy was lower. More next steps, we want to add global demand groups. So right now this is only for North America, but we want to expand this to include Australia, Canada, and the rest of our demand groups. And then regularly meet with leadership to discuss strategies for B and C SKUs. So the SKUs that are driving the bottom 20% of our sales dollars, is there a better model that we can put those on so that our demand planners aren't focusing all of their time and efforts on a SKU that's not driving anything significant to the company's bottom line. Next slide. So in conclusion, the coefficient of variation is a measure of demand volatility and an indicator of forecastability of an item. The variation in both the volume and the timing have a heavy impact on forecast accuracy and the signals that we send to supply. And the ClickView dashboard provides an easy compilation of data and visuals to enhance the planner's ability to dial in on focus areas. And just to expand on that last point a little bit, if you're able to back it up a few slides to the screenshot of the dashboard. I think it's, yep, this one. Oh, there you go. This too, if you look in the middle, it'll have a material count. So the nice thing for a demand planner too, to be able to focus our attention better, not only to know what kind of conversations we should be driving with our supply counterparts, but just in our daily demand planning responsibilities. You can see these are my products. I have 409 SKUs that I'm responsible for, but this dashboard allows me to hone in on which ones I think are in my control. So historically, demand planners, and including myself, when we were told to go and scrub and try to improve our forecast, we would typically take the SKUs that had the lowest GFA. So which ones have 0, can we make them better? And this dashboard really allows you to kind of figure out, based on the variation and the current GFA, which SKUs you're actually going to get the most bang for your buck on. So you're able to filter it for the bottom left, which are those opportunity SKUs. And obviously we can't click it into it right now, but I think it's about 110 SKUs, which is, you know, a quarter of the SKUs that I'm responsible for, saying that if I can improve those 110 SKUs, I'm going to get a lot more bang for my buck, essentially. Like, my effort is going to be more worthwhile. They're within my control, so it's not necessarily a waste of time to try to forecast them better, as opposed to trying to improve the unforecastable SKUs, which at that point we just need to have a conversation with supply and figure out a better supply and safety stock strategy, and not necessarily rely on improving that forecast. Right, if you can go back. Perfect. And then that was just a list of my references. Sorry.
Okay, excellent. I have a couple questions came in for Halina.
Okay.
The first one is, how are the dividing lines for the 4 quadrants, sweet spot, opportunity, unforecastable, etc., decided?
Yep. Can you go back to the slide with the dashboard again, please? Yep. So right now, the forecast accuracy line is sitting at 55%. Based on my research, 60% is pretty much world-class accuracy. And at Black & Decker, the general guideline that we're aiming for is 55%. And the COV cutoff line is 0.8. Just from my research, that seemed like a pretty good baseline that a lot of different companies in the same industries were using. But you can see on the bottom left, it has a quad filter. It's a little bit cut off with the names of them, but it does allow you to type in different percentages and cutoff points. So again, if I'm working on those outdoor products, I know that naturally my products are going to have more variation. So 0.8 might be too low, and all of my products are going to fall into the right side of the graph. So those planners have the ability to go in and change that to like 1.1, just to recategorize their SKUs based on the nature of their items.
All right, could a further analysis be done for the type of forecasting method being used? Thus, are we doing better, for example, for a moving average type of method, or are we doing better with the Holt Winters method?
Yep. So I actually worked in conjunction with another demand planner at my company. She had been doing a project similar to that at the same time that I started this. So we've been working together on those unforecastable SKUs to try to determine if there's a specific model that's better than others, so that we can, for lack of a better phrase, kind of leave it, just, you know, set it to that model and forget about it. So she's been taking all of those unforecastable SKUs and in Excel manually calculating the forecast for each of those models. So we have Croston, Holtz Winter, which is similar to Lewandowski that we use, and moving average, and Foyer, which is another one that we have in our planning software. And for the last 12 months has been calculating which one would have given us the best forecast, so that we can go back to IT and switch our model.
And then last question for Halina, will your metrics and goals change in an extended business environment worldwide?
Yes. So forecast accuracy right now is kind of out the window, I guess you could say, at Black & Decker. As most people can probably imagine, if anybody else is in a similar industry, they can probably relate to. The POS data that we're getting is just completely different than anything our data would have ever told us to predict. Our online businesses are the POS for my I work on the Home Depot account, and our POS is up 115% last week, meaning it's more than doubled for our online business. And obviously store side, so going into Home Depot stores has significantly reduced below what we would normally have ever expected. So very hard to predict. Obviously, nobody saw this coming, so our metrics are definitely changing for this year.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Halina.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. That asked if it's possible for the students who are presenting to turn their video on so we can see them. So if it's possible, we'll do that for the next couple presenters. Although if you can't, I also understand you may be calling in and things like that as well.